3 words, and for the better part of a century they pulled at the American appetite like nothing else in the language. All you can eat. You know the rest of the sign without being told. The parking lot full of family vans, the double glass doors, the long silver line of steam tables glowing under the heat lamps. A tower of warm plates at one end, and no rules after that. Nobody ever needed the deal explained. You pay once at the register, and the kitchen surrenders. Fried chicken next to mashed potatoes, next to green gelatin, next to a soft-serve machine that a 9-year-old could operate without supervision. Go back as many times as you like. That was the entire religion of the place. Nobody is counting. For a couple of generations of American families, that room was Sunday after church. It was where you went when the Little League team won, when Grandpa turned 70, when 6 people needed dinner and 1 paycheck had to stretch across all of them. Those rooms are going dark now. The chains that built them are bankrupt, liquidated, or quietly erased, and the signs with the 3 magic words are coming down all over the country. The death is stranger than it looks, though. The all-you-can-eat buffet is not losing to a better restaurant. It is starving to death in the best-fed nation on earth. When people notice their buffet is gone, they blame the pandemic, and the pandemic did hold the pillow. But this patient had been in and out of the emergency room for more than a decade before anyone owned a mask. The buffet only ever sold one thing, not the food exactly, and certainly not the service, of which it proudly had almost none. It sold quantity at a flat price, abundance as a bargain, in a country where abundance was still the dream. That bargain ran on brutal arithmetic and margins thin enough to read through, and it held together only while America stayed hungry and food stayed cheap. Then, over roughly 20 years, every number in the equation flipped. So this is the autopsy of an institution rather than a single brand, and it closes on a detail almost too perfect to be true. When the largest buffet company America ever produced filed its final bankruptcy, there was not one buffet left inside it to close. America, it should be said, did not invent the idea. America imported it, and then did the most American thing possible, which was to supersize it and put a flat price on the door. The ancestor was Swedish, the smorgasbord, a table crowded with open dishes that guests grazed at will. At the New York World's Fair in 1939, the restaurant in the Swedish pavilion laid one out for the crowds, and the word smorgasbord walked out of that fair straight into the American vocabulary. But the all-you-can-eat buffet as a business was born in Las Vegas, and it was born as bait. In 1946, a publicist at the El Rancho Vegas casino named Herb McDonald got hungry late one night and, as the story is usually told, spread bread and cold cuts across the bar to build himself a sandwich. The gamblers wanted in. McDonald recognized what he had instantly, and soon the casino was feeding the midnight crowd from a chuck wagon spread, all anyone could eat for $1. The food was never meant to make money. It was meant to keep a man in the building at 2 in the morning, and at that job it was magnificent. The idea spread from casino to casino until the cheap endless spread became as much a part of Las Vegas as the slot machine. Then the buffet left the desert and found its true audience, the post-war American family. The country was in the middle of its baby boom, with station wagons full of children and usually one salary to feed them on. A restaurant with a fixed price where the pickiest kid could always find something beige and a teenage boy could finally be turned loose was not a novelty. It was closer to a public utility. The chains arrived in waves. Golden Corral opened its first restaurant in Fayetteville, North Carolina in 1973, a family steakhouse at first, with the endless buffet line coming later. In 1983, a man named Roe Hatlin co-founded Old Country Buffet out of Minnesota, and the Midwest fell hard. Ryan's fed the South, Furr's fed Texas and the Southwest. Sizzler ran its famous salad bar out west, and CiCi's stretched even pizza into an endless line. By the mid-90s, Hatlin's company, by then called Buffets Incorporated, had merged with its western rival Hometown Buffet, and the combined empire would eventually stretch past 600 restaurants. This was the golden age. The steam tables never cooled. What the families in that line never saw was that the machine behind the sneeze guard ran on fumes. A buffet earns its living on averages, not appetites. By one industry analysis, The food an average customer piles onto those plates cost the house around $7.40. Set that against a flat ticket, subtract rent and labor and lights, and the classic buffet chains kept something like 5 cents of every dollar that crossed the register. As for the glutton of legend, the man who eats a restaurant into ruin, he was mostly a myth the model had already priced in. Perhaps one diner in 20 truly eats more than his ticket. He was never the threat, because grandma's salad plate and your little sister's lone bowl of macaroni paid for him several times over. A machine that keeps a nickel on the dollar survives only while every input stays cheap and the crowd stays enormous. Around the turn of the century, the crowd began to thin. Between the late 1990s and the late 2010s, while the American restaurant industry as a whole grew by more than a fifth, the number of buffets in the country shrank by roughly a quarter, more than 1,000 of them gone. That is not a pandemic story. That is 2 decades of a country slowly changing its mind. Somewhere in those years, abundance stopped being the dream. Food had become cheap and available everywhere. Portions had ballooned across every menu in America, and a new generation was taught to see value in a better burrito rather than a bigger pile. Quantity drifted from promise to warning label. Calorie counts went up on menu boards, and the buffet's proudest word, endless, started to sound less like generosity and more like a dare. The core crowd aged, and the dining rooms aged along with them, because a nickel of margin does not pay for renovations. And right at the moment the buffet needed patient owners, it got the other kind. In 2000, a New York private equity firm bought Buffets Incorporated, the parent of Old Country and Hometown, in a leveraged buyout worth more than $600 million, financed the way those deals always are, with borrowed money. In 2006, the same owners doubled down and bought Ryan's in a deal valued at roughly $876 million including debt, welding the biggest family buffet chains in America into a single company. The champagne barely had time to go flat. Little more than a year after that deal closed, in January of 2008, the combined company was in Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Its 626 restaurants across 39 states suddenly trading in the shadow of a courtroom. Consider what borrowed money means to a business that keeps 5 cents on the dollar. Every dollar of interest has to be dragged out of $20 of meatloaf. There was never any fat in this model to borrow against, because being fat-free was the model. So the company did the only thing such a company can do. It nudged prices up on a customer whose entire loyalty was to the price. It leaned on cheaper ingredients in a business where the food was the only product. It postponed every renovation until walking into some locations felt like stepping back into 1991. Each decision was individually sensible. Together they thinned out the bargain that was the only reason anyone drove over. The bankruptcies settled into a rhythm, Chapter 11 in 2008, again in 2012 with dozens of restaurants closed, again in 2016 under new owners and a new corporate name, each round leaving the chain smaller and more tired. The pandemic enters the story here, so this is the moment to say what an autopsy is actually for. A virus gets credited with a lot of deaths that were already scheduled, and separating the cause from the finisher is the entire discipline. If you want the next American collapse examined with this much care, subscribe. That is how you tell me. Because in March of 2020, the buffet became the one restaurant format in America that was all but outlawed. There is no version of a communal serving spoon that survives a plague. Every buffet in the country went dark, overnight, and for a shocking number of them, the dark turned out to be permanent. Souplantations said it out loud first. In May of 2020, its owner announced that all 97 Souplantation and Sweet Tomatoes locations were closing for good, and there is a grim little joke in the fact that the buffet built around vegetables was the first one to die. Sizzler followed into Chapter 11 that September. CiCi's, the endless pizza line, filed in January of 2021. And in April of 2021 came the filing this whole story had been building toward. The successor company behind Old Country Buffet, Hometown Buffet, Ryan's and Furr's, which had entered the pandemic with about 100 restaurants, filed the family's 5th bankruptcy since 2008. On the day of that filing, exactly 6 of its restaurants were still serving food, and every one of the 6 was a steakhouse. The mightiest buffet empire America ever built died without a single buffet left to close. The rest was liquidation. Even Las Vegas, the birthplace, has been turning off the heat lamps. The city had roughly 75 buffets before the pandemic, and today the Strip is down to a handful, with its biggest operator announcing plans to shut its final 3 within the next year or so. The casino buffet existed to hold you near the tables, fed cheaply at a loss the slot machines repaid. The modern resort makes its money on rooms, clubs, and celebrity chefs, so the subsidy is over, and the $1 logic of 1946 is finally dead in the town that wrote it. Menu extinction, though, almost never kills everything. It kills the middle, and it leaves survivors at the extremes. At one end stands Golden Corral, the last national chain on its feet. The pandemic nearly took it too, with roughly a quarter of its locations gone by some estimates. But it clawed back to around 400 restaurants and has lately been posting record weekly sales. When every rival in the category dies, the last buffet in town inherits every buffet craving in town. At the other end sits the Bacchanal at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, a buffet built at a reported cost of $100 million, serving more than 250 items out of 10 kitchens. The buffet survives there by inverting itself, no longer the cheapest meal in town but a bucket list spectacle, at a price no family of 6 would ever pay on an ordinary Sunday. And in between, flickers a ghost. Sweet Tomatoes, dead since 2020, was revived by new owners who reopened one location in Tucson in 2024 and a second in Fort Myers, Florida just weeks ago. 2 restaurants standing in for the 97 that died, run less like a chain than like a museum of how dinner used to feel. What is not coming back is the institution itself, the cheap steam table palace out by the highway with the 3-word promise on the sign. That place required a specific America, one with big hungry families, dirt cheap food, and a genuine belief that more was its own reward. It sold that America the one luxury it could afford, which was plenty. And the finding on this death certificate is that Americans never really fell out of love with the buffet. The country just finally got full. So bring me your buffet. Which one was yours? An Old Country, a Ryan's, a Furr's, a Ponderosa, the Chinese buffet out by the interstate that is somehow still hanging on? What went on the first plate you ever stacked yourself, back when nobody was counting? And rule on the death in the comments while you are here. Was it the virus, the private equity debt, or a country that quietly lost its appetite for more? If a true one opened near you tomorrow, honest prices and a gleaming line, would you take your kids, or does the all-you-can-eat buffet only work now as a memory? The comment section is self-serve, and it never runs out. Go on back for seconds.